I've been a vocal critic of the Saudis for years and led the effort to block billions in arms sales to Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have demonstrated a relentless pattern of malign behavior ranging from the brutal killing and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi within their consulate, for which they evaded punishment, and their consistent disregard for human rights is well known. Additionally, they have committed war crimes in Yemen, a war for which American taxpayers are being used as unwitting accomplices, resulting in thousands of civilian casualties from their ruthless actions. Nevertheless, I see no constitutional power that suggests Congress should involve itself in Gulf. I have no doubt that some will argue that the tax code or somewhere in the ever-expansive Commerce Clause is the power to regulate private agreements. I disagree. As an originalist interpretation of the Constitution would lead to a different conclusion. If we took the Ninth Amendment seriously, if we took the principles of liberty, of contract seriously, we would acknowledge that the Constitution affords protection for such agreements. We have no business asking the PGA about their negotiations or what they might do or what they might do. It's not the business of government. If members of the Senate wanted to express their outrage over Saudi Arabia in a meaningful way, I gave them an opportunity to do so. In December 2021, I proposed canceling $650 million sale of 280 advanced air-to-air missiles and 596 missile launchers to Saudi Arabia, but there was no congressional hearing. We're here today talking about Gulf, but we didn't have one congressional hearing over sending hundreds of millions of dollars of advanced weapons to Saudi Arabia. There was no expression of outrage. Instead, 67 senators voted against my proposal and voted to continue selling arms to Saudi Arabia. It's time that Congress rediscovers the presumption of liberty, that our first recourse is to defend the unenumerated rights of private actors, not to expand our few and defined powers to regulate anything we may personally dislike. As a member of this institution, I find no grounds for government to be involved in the game of golf. But are there legitimate questions? Could we have legitimate hearings? Are there things we should be discussing? Of course. Do the 9/11 victims have a legal obligation owed to them by the Saudi Arabian government? It's a real question. Should we be involved with selling arms to Saudi Arabia? A real question. Should be debated, and we should have votes on these things. Should we be involved in the war in Yemen? Nobody in Congress ever voted to go in war in Yemen. Why the hell are we involved in that war? Furthermore, with regard to sports, there is a valid discussion that should be going on, and we should have a discussion of, and that's the antitrust involvement in sports. I think, like most antitrust, it's topsy-turvy. It's flipped upside down. It's doing the wrong thing. PGA mentioned they have some rules. You join the PGA, you got to obey some rules to be part of the PGA. If you don't obey those rules, they should have the right to exclude you. That's what associations are about. If you don't allow them to have rules. The court has totally screwed this up, and Congress has let them. The court ruled unanimously that the NCAA can't invoke their rules. And so they've completely screwed up college athletes. We used to be proud. Many of us loved watching amateur athletes that weren't paid. Now everybody that plays basketball in college is going to be driving a Bentley or a Rolls. I mean, we're going to be seeing rap stars instead of basketball stars. I mean, this is crazy. But you know why it happened? Because Congress sat around and said, oh, well, because of antitrust, we can't let the NCAA do it. It went to the court, and the court made the ruling, unfortunately, a unanimous ruling based on the law. So the law's got to change. Antitrust shouldn't be involved with associations, shouldn't be involved with the PGA, shouldn't be involved with the NCAA. For the most part, antitrust in our country actually does the opposite of what it is intended to do. I'll give you another example. As a physician, if 5 physicians get together and say, we don't like Blue Cross paying us $80 and we want to get $100 an exam from Blue Cross or from United or from Humana, from some billion-dollar company, do you know what antitrust does? Antitrust sues 5 doctors and says you can't talk about this. It's ridiculous. Antitrust is actually protecting the big people versus the small people. But it's a unique situation to talk about associations, particularly sports associations. Antitrust should let sports associations. You don't have to join PGA. You don't have to join a sports association. You can be outside the NCAA, but the only way they had power was because they had the power of a large body and there was prestige in being part of the NCAA. All of that's gone. It's the wild, wild west, and nobody knows what's going to happen with college sports, but nobody's really happy about it. You know, there always are professional sports. And as someone who grew up in a sport that wasn't one where you were well remunerated, I understand the idea of trying to allow some contracts. There were some in-betweens on these things. You know, for swimmers, swimmers don't really have professional sports. But at the same time, there was a way to probably do this that could have been done through the NCAA, but the courts gutted the NCAA and Congress sat by and watched this. So there are legitimate concerns that we could look into as Congress, but I don't think it's a legitimate concern to berate private individuals over contracts, to get involved and say, well, what are you going to do? Will you promise me the contract won't do this? That's not the role of government, to tell people, oh, you can't make a contract doing this. No, in a free country, you make contracts. They're the business of the people making contracts, and government shouldn't be involved in this at all. So I see a certain illegitimacy to the whole proceeding today. Valid questions about Saudi Arabia that should be addressed, but we're not addressing the valid things because we have a show trial basically of a private organization, which I think is inappropriate.
Thank you.